Why do you believe what you believe? Because at some point in your life, you trusted the information that somebody was giving you. And that someone you trusted told you that a car was a car, a tree was a tree, a bird was a bird, the blue stuff above you is the sky. And that's the way that we began to determine what we believe to be a fact. Most of the things that we believe to be a fact in our lives are told to us through our stories or the news that we hear. So my question would be, if they were deceiving you with the stories they tell you, would you be able to recognize that?
When you think about the entertainment industry, what comes to mind? Movies, TV, music, right? Let's talk about this entertainment.
I've been observing you.
What if this entertainment was more than just entertainment?
Now in complete control!
When you're driving home from work, what are you listening to? When you come home after a long day and turn on the TV, what do you see?
The U.S. are bracing.
Saying that they're one.
Think about all the content you've seen throughout your whole life. A lot of it has actually made us who we are today.
So you don't know what's really going on.
Have you ever stopped for just a second, though, and questioned the content? The only thing we consume more than content is air. But we actually think about the quality of the air we breathe. Maybe it's time to take a closer look at our content.
And fear. Taxes.
Our government's always controlled our content.
The fight for freedom.
We've just never paid attention.
Freedom of speech.
Message received.
The police occupy our community.
To work with the CIA to destabilize foreign countries.
This media that we're consuming at such a rapid rate, we need to slow down and think about what we're consuming.
Bullshit going on.
What if the people in charge didn't have our best interests in mind? Now we have to ask ourselves, who's influencing our content?
Is the CIA involved in Hollywood?
Yes.
Known as the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud claimed his father molested all of his siblings. Freud was a cocaine addict as well as a pedophile advocate who taught that children sexually lusted after their parents and that children who reported sexual abuse by adults had either imagined or fantasized the experience. He believed that women were the problem with society and all their problems stemmed from not having a penis. Freud's grandson, Sir Clement Freud, had been accused of molesting multiple young girls and was suspected in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, Sigmund Freud's sister Anna Freud, whom Freud claimed was regularly molested and abused by their perverted father, gave birth to Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda. Bernays took his family work in psychology and used it to help governments and corporations manipulate the minds of the public. Hired by the American Tobacco Company, Bernays manipulated women into buying more cigarettes by convincing them that smoking was a form of feminist liberation. During the propaganda campaign, he dubbed cigarettes torches of freedom. Thanks to the Bernays and his family's twisted legacy, social engineering became big business. Modern psychology was used to exploit mankind's mental weaknesses, nature, and the public's lower desires, and turn people into mindless consumers. Is it any surprise then that the great nephew of Edward Bernays is none other than Mark Bernays Randolph, the co-founder and original CEO of Netflix? Does anyone really think this is a coincidence? Netflix has not only replaced network television as the premier home of pop culture, it is also continuing the degenerate and depraved social engineering of the Bernays Freud legacy. In 13 Reasons Why, Netflix was accused of romanticizing suicide during a recent increase of teenage suicides. In The Devil Next Door, they were accused of rewriting history to deceive viewers into believing that Poland was responsible for establishing Nazi death camps. In The First Temptation of Christ, Jesus Christ is depicted as a homosexual, and the Texas grand jury indicted Netflix for depicting child sex in the movie Cuties. Netflix and chill, the new preferred method for brainwashing the masses, brought to you by one of the most depraved, degenerate families of the modern era. Turn it off and wake up now.
Many years ago, our client was the Beachnet Packing Company. We made a research and found out that the American public ate very light breakfasts of coffee, maybe a roll, and orange juice. We went to our physician, found that a heavy breakfast was sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast, because the body loses energy during the night and needs it during the day. We asked the physician, after telling him why we were talking to him, would he be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his, confirmed his judgment. He said he would be glad to do it. We carried out a letter to 5,000 physicians. Obviously, all of them concurred that a heavy breakfast was better for the health of the American people than a light breakfast. That was publicized in the newspapers. Newspapers throughout the country had headlines saying 4,500 physicians urge heavy breakfast in order to improve health of American people. Many of them stated that bacon and eggs should be embodied with the breakfast, and as a result, the sale of bacon went up. And I still have a letter from Bartlett Arkell, president of Beachnet Packing Company, telling me so.
The party told you to reject all evidence of your eyes and your ears. It was their final, most essential command. 1984, George Orwell. Most people today that think that all entertainment like movies, drama, sport, etc. is there for nothing more than their entertainment. That was never, ever the case. The greatest social conditioning messages are promoted throughout our movies and drama. High drama through the fixation of emotional sequences, not logical nor factual, but pushing opinions across people's minds in an emotional way, which does register and fix in the mind of the individual. So emotional content is very, very important, rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic or facts. There's no debates allowed when people are reacting with emotion. And when you're being downloaded with emotional information through the fiction in our media, your guard is down. This is why gaslighting works so well with mainstream media. Wear a mask, save lives. Inject an experimental mRNA jab into your child, save granny. Spend £2 a week to save polar bears, Eskimos, save people in countries you never either heard of or could point out on a map. All the while our own Irish brothers and sisters are forgotten about. This is how strong the television set is. If our beloved RTE told us to care about our own people and used our service to push pro-Irish content, the brainwashed mass of people would be more caring to our own rather than welcoming more and more refugees into our communities that can't even accommodate or facilitate what we already have in those communities. But if mainstream media says we need to do more for Ukraine or Somalia, Afghanistan and Georgians, you know, all the people that's coming into this country, then most people will say, yes, we have to do more for them people. Anyone who speaks out and says we need to look after our own first and foremost is a far-right racist, according to our mainstream media, and so the mass of people also believe this. You see, when one is emotional, the sensor part of their brain is not in action. It isn't saying, yes, I agree with this, nor does it say, I disagree with it, as you would in such a debate or a lecture. Instead, people tend to go the way the majority leans towards, or the way the media perceives the direction you should go. To speak against the narrative is scary, terrifying even. What if people look at me different? I better say nothing and keep my mouth shut. While you watch the destruction of your country and your kids' futures being stripped away piece by piece in front of your very eyes. They know deep down their own kids may never have a future in this country, and most certainly will find it hard to be homed. While they watch our country and home getting flooded daily with more and more refugees and illegal immigrants, and given homes and resources that we don't give our own. You see, when watching TV, you're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with ideas that are not your own. You see, there is a hidden government that runs all governments. Let's just call them the deep state, with many branches wanted to rule the world. Basically, using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, with resources such as MI5 and the 77 Brigade, which also is joined with the US CIA counterintelligence under the Anglo-American establishment. Using the works of Marx, Engels, etc., and the teachings of the Frankfurt School, they wrote about the changes that they would create to our culture over a 100-year period, that they would actually design, implement and bring it in. And H.G. Wells talked about it too. He talked about arenas. He says arenas could be put up across the world for sports, for instance. Now, at that time, sport was something that school children were into. Adults became adults and got onto adult things. So it was unimaginable at the time that people could actually believe that there's even a need for adult sports and entertainment, never mind having arenas built across the world. But he said, we can do this and manufacture basically a sports culture for the males using a tribal system. You see, we're all tribal to an extent. That's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood by those shaping our society. That's why we are supplied with these leaders, and why I continuously ask everyone to be their own leaders and stop looking for a white knight. But because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny because the expert class arose, and through psychology manufactured a new societal norm through social engineering. It was decided by the deep state that the males would get their outlet for satisfaction and social conditioning through the media of sport. Therefore, the male could have a tribal team that they could identify with. They could cheer them on as they were winning, as if their team's win was actually winning in their own personal lives. While in reality, how does a team winning actually impact on anyone's life? It doesn't. It just gives a sense of fake euphoria. And because it feels good, it must be. It's like a drug, you see. Fake emotions to get you feeling better while the country around you burns. People are getting disenfranchised in the sense as experts took over decision making for all fields. You no longer need to think. Just listen to the experts. Listen to the nice man on TV. Ask Google. Ask Siri. This is what psychology and science had planned before they even implemented the sports. That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. They are merely actors to whom the men and kids will listen to, respect, a false idol of sorts. Footballers, celebrities getting millions a year, politicians and journalists also, because they too are just merely actors. Do you believe this? If not, I'll ask one question. Why would they be put in these positions of power and get so much money? Quite simply because, you see, those who control society and control our government are not recognised people. So they need people in the entertainment industry, recognised, trusted faces like Neil Prendeville and your RTE celebrities Claire Byrne. You need football celebrities, managers and actors such as Jurgen Klopp's push on the vaccines to promote the narrative of the deep state. You see, while many people struggle to pay their bills or feed their families, the very same people put their trust into these rich celebrities. These people are paid, and they're paid quite handsomely because, quite simply, they are key members of the Roman circus. What does the emperor do when the people become angry and restless, and more so when the people are asking questions and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor? He sends them to the circus. He creates a circus, he builds a giant Coliseum, and he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races and football games and rugby games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world, so that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is, so they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they are being manipulated, so they don't ever question the emperor. That's why they pay celebrity football stars, journalists, politicians so much a year. Not because they tell you the truth, but because they keep you distracted and push their narrative. They are all part of the Roman circus. All the distractions like Johnny Depp's court case, Russell Brand, Donald Trump, etc. All distractions to take your eyes away from the fire in your home that's spreading. I know men who don't even know anything that's happening in this country or the world unless it's on TV. But they know exactly who plays in what football club and what position they play in. And they believe that this is a great accomplishment. And they meet up and hug each other, have a few pints and talk about how many goals Messi or Ronaldo got in last night's game. Meanwhile, every bit of freedom they once enjoyed is being eradicated. And the UN and the World Health Organization's new education curriculum is sexually grooming their children, while they watch the entire destruction of our culture and country that's happening in front of their very eyes. But because it's not on TV, they just simply do not care. It is extremely sad. First, the radio came along. Of course, they used that to the maximum. Maximum sports for the men, soaps for the women. Then in came television, as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state, and sure enough, around the 50s and the 60s, it took off. It really took off, and men became glued on Saturday nights to the sports shows, a culture industry which is what it's called by its own creators. You see, the communist Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. They had actors and directors who were called the cultural leaders. They were leaders because, just like a computer, they could program and hack people's minds. All you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation into a new way of thinking. Up is down, left is right, and right is wrong. In this new world, men can turn into women with the power of one's mind, and an extremely ridiculous operation in which, again, Big Pharma makes billions from. We are all getting the same uploads, upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call the newer upgrade political correctness. or as I like to call it, cultural Marxism. Most people want to belong to a peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their family and friends who will answer back and agree on the same topics. It doesn't matter if the topics of what's being discussed is utter nonsense. As long as everyone agrees at the same time and all your friends will all agree because they all had the same information given to them and it's on TV, and when a famous face says something, then it must be true. Wear a mask or you're not part of the groupthink, the collective, and endorsed by our trusted faces on media. We will mock and ridicule our real family and friends because we trust the man on the TV more than our own loved ones. That is true brainwashing. How dare you think differently to all of us who listens to that nice, trustworthy man on the TV? That nice man on TV doesn't have to show you facts or anything else. You see, you've been brought up with these faces. That's why they keep these guys on TV up into their 70s and 80s, because you trust them. You've grown up with these people on TV like they're some sort of father figure who's on television every night in your house, in your room, staring right at you, and he's a father figure. Brzezinski, who was way up with the NSA, who also was a master geopolitical politician himself, said that the public will shortly be able to unable to think or reason for themselves. His meaning is that the form that we get our information through our media and how we process it, the methods that were used then in the 1970s to the more advanced methods they use now today. This is why the mass amount of people were unable to think or reason for themselves. Emotions won't lift their cognitive dissonance, and pride or ego of admitting they may be wrong will see them in a continuous loop that will always go back to the same trusted source of information. The tell a vision or tell a lie, with programs that quite actually programs your mind. Eventually, Brzezinski said that they will expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them, and he was absolutely correct. You see, the communists have infiltrated all walks of life. They heavily finance the NGOs and the community groups and the grassroots sports clubs, which all push the Agenda 21 sustainability dictatorship. The enemy no longer needs to wage war with tanks or guns. The illusion or threat of war, of viruses, or climate change, impending disasters is more than enough. As JFK tried to warn us in the speech that got him assassinated.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Well, that is what is happening today, and that's why people today can't think outside of the programming from television and worse, the John D. Rockefeller indoctrination system, the Board of Education worldwide. The man who created the education system, John D. Rockefeller, created the education system for one simple thing: to create a nation of workers, not thinkers. His own words: we go into school, we are taught to listen and to obey our peers. Read out textbook word for word, repeat it over and over till it's a fact in your head. No questions, no debates allowed. What if everything in that textbook was a lie? Repeat a lie enough times, the lie becomes the truth. In 1984, we see the main character Winston struggling hard to believe that 2 + 2 = 5. You may ask, is there any room in society where these manipulations aren't trying to socially condition one through entertainment? My only answer is, if the person understands that a game is just a game and a movie is just entertainment and not to be invested in fictional characters on the TV, if people understand that nobody should be worth paying 2 to 3 million a year, if you want to get rich, do so by the sweat of your labour. Work hard to do something constructive that adds something good to society. But don't do it by taking people's minds away from the emperor. It's a game. Football is a game. The journalist on the TV is an actor reading a script, pushing a narrative to make up your mind for you. But let me tell you something. When a few hundred of the most powerful men, women in the world can meet in places like Bilderberg, Chatham House or Davos to plot the fate of billions of people worldwide, and yet nobody even gives a fuck. But a few football players or politicians or celebrities go to lunch together and it's in the headlines across the country. You know what you are watching is entertainment, not news. Especially when same news channels hide many truths of assaults, rapes and murders from illegal immigrants in this country on a daily basis. Why, you may ask? Simply because it will hurt the internationalist agenda narrative. This reflects the society in which that exists today, and it is a sick society that is doomed if it's not healed. The Great Reset is self-destruction of the world we once knew. Agenda 21 is the new system the so-called elites want us in. A police state run with capitalist economy and a communist social control system, like what we see in China under the CCP. You see, communists believe capitalist is the enemy, and capitalists think communism is the enemy. You see, those financing the socialist agenda are not socialist. Communism was never the creation of the people to overthrow the bankers and the capitalists. It was created by the bankers and the capitalists to take all assets and means of production and enslave the people. And that is what makes me so sick, that I'm trying to wake people up on a daily basis. Agenda 21 and the 17 sustainability goals is the greatest threat to humanity in all our lifetime, and every politician worldwide, every internationalist, NGO, journalist, local community group are pushing this agenda without either fully unaware of its ramifications or worse, they are aware of it and they still push it anyway. I wish to God I was wrong about every belief system I have, every truth I have. I don't have ego, I want to be wrong, so wrong. But all the hardcore evidence keeps showing me I'm not. The dictatorship and tyranny of all our leaders in every political party and so-called journalist also shows me I'm not. Ireland is a Catholic country, a family-orientated country of good people, but lately has completely changed, and that's because of internationalists interfering with national values and interests and morals. Ireland's apparently so-called Conservative Party has a gay Indian who's been caught cheating with a younger man. You know, the people that leads us is a true reflection on the Ireland we see today. But it's not too late to get our country back. There is a minority that are awake to all of this, and if they don't do something about it now, they will lose their freedom to do so very soon. I can only ask, those who aren't awake to just start listening to us, and more so, come to your own conclusions once you start listening, without the idea of emotions, to at least some of the information of what we are trying to tell you. But those who know and don't speak up, whether you may think, well, I don't need to worry about it because I know what I know and I'm fine. It does not work that way. There is a nation of people who are willing to send their sons and daughters that they profess that they love to go and get an experimental mRNA gene editing poison that the nice man on TV calls a COVID vaccine. And the same people will tell you it is 100% safe and effective. While many people hear stories of loved ones who's either dead or battling rapid cancers, myocarditis and other serious complications over these jabs, it really shows the control the mainstream media has over their minds. But those who are awake and aware of the parasites have a duty to keep trying to plant a seed that hopefully breaks their barrier and get their mind actually back to rational thinking. We do this with truth and information, not shouting or ridiculing. They may use the excuse to themselves that they're sending their children to take the experimental jab because a family member is at risk, etc. The mainstream narrative and the same lie they use over and over to gaslight. They may send their little boys to get their penises cut off because his school told him he can be a girl if he done so. And the parents may say, I've done this to protect him from emotional pain. The truth is your kid was confused and needed you. As a parent, your job is to keep your kids grounded in truth and reality and to protect them, not to feed their delusions, and worse, to encourage them to self-mutilate their own bodies. Your excuse is to save them from emotional pain. The emotional pain of the truth, so you rather feed their delusions and push physical torture onto them. A boy can't ever be a female. They just become a mutilated boy. That's not my truth. That is the only truth. And they know damn well, those who push the lies. Trust the science with your loved ones, your children, etc. The same science that says women can have penises and men can get pregnant. This is a scientific communist dictatorship. Science is the new religion of choice. I rather trust reality. Thank you though. Julian Huxley said they would bring in the scientifically controlled society. And he was correct. To truly start reaching people, we need to start connecting with people. Not through technology, but through community. The enemy wants us angry, wants us fighting amongst ourselves and others, wants us divided. When you shout and scream at each other, you shut down debate and you lose your platform for others to listen. We play into the enemy's hands by working on emotions. Let's get our voices heard, let's get our message out. Not by doing what the enemy wants, but getting ahead of the enemy for the first time in 3 years. Stop reacting and start being proactive. If I walked past a protest where one side is shouting Nazi scum off our streets and the other side is shouting pedos, 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 do you honestly believe that I am going to stop and listen to the message? Absolutely not. There is a better chance of me stopping and listening if one group was shouting Nazi scum off our streets, which we all know they are there because they're paid to do so, and distract and silence our voices. We need to be more like a family and actually stop feeding these international rodents with oxygen. Starve the parasites out by ignoring them. That's how we bridge division in this country. With love and kindness, We need to forgive those who turned their backs on us. Remember, to fight for humanity, we ourselves must show that it is in us that we still have humanity. We are on the side of good and love, while those who push the internationalist agenda do so because they are financially rewarded to push the destruction of our wonderful country. And then, when we have real numbers, we can take back our country from the parasites that's squatting within our dial, not their dial. So the most important thing that you must realize right now is we are at war. If you cannot distinguish between reality and entertainment, if you cannot see what's happening in front of your very eyes, and you have to go to your TV to understand the way the world is working, I plead with you, please turn off your TV and start going out and talking to people, because you need to get back to reality, and you need to turn off and switch off from the bread and circuses.
My name is Ashley, and I'm 49 years of age. I'm a qualified dental nurse, and I've been homeless for 1 year. I've been living in a car with my 2 dogs. I've worked all my life and took nothing from the state. And my great granny, Molly Doyle, fought beside Jim Larkin and Michael Collins. And my great granny, she fought the English and she got our freedom back. And if this government thinks that I'm going to be a fucking slave to an Irishman, they're out of their goddamn mind. Now, I have spent €60,000 of my own money, saved hard, work, earned money to stay off the streets with my 3 dogs, and I've only 2 left.
You see what you are fucking doing?
I was spare room, I know fucking well. And I would just like to say to all the Irish people that are sitting on their fucking couches watching Netflix, get up! Get up! Get up! Get up! And get fighting! This is our country, and I will fight every single one of you till I have the last breath in my body. And when I'm finished wiping the floor with the lot of you, see you, the Minister of Health.
No,
I got a fucking COVID test for trying to hang myself, and I got sent home with the rope mark. With the rope mark. And I tell you something, I will keep telling my stories, and I will fight. And my great granny Molly Doyle, she'll rise from the fucking grave. I'm so proud of every single one of you that have come out. I have lived for a year being petrified, terrified, absolutely in horrific circumstances. And I'm here to fight with the last piece of strength I have left for everyone who needs help in my country, in our country. I love you all, Erin. God bless you all.
What you fucking do? You don't know?
No.
Viewers, you don't know who the camera is.
No.
You don't know why you're being made to see these things. Nor do I. You're seeing me. I can't even see you. I may be dead by the time you watch this. Very possibly are. You don't know who's the man who's making things he wants you to see. Destroy your television sets. Now. You must listen to no orders. That's all I can tell you for this point in humanity. Believe me.
You see, people cooperate out of fear of rejection from society against their own will. People are compelled to accept stories with fear. No people believe in the story, they are just compelled to accept it. The devil is the author of deception, so he will happily throw some truth amongst a lie to keep the people confused. People uninformed can't choose wisely. Always remember, have faith instead of fear. Ridicule as a weapon. Demonization of the enemy is the general default position of American message making against international threats. The history of warfare shows, however, that while demonization can build and maintain alliances and coalitions and is important to maintain national unity in a protracted conflict, it can inadvertently aid the enemy's war aims. And let's hope it does, because demonization is a war against God.
And Kane is here at an appropriate time because the presidential election grinds on and Donald Trump, I need my honey loquat. Donald Trump is already floating the conspiracy theory that the election might be rigged. And who knows? He could be right. Because I heard that millions of Americans are planning to use a secret ballot. And there are all kinds of conspiracy theories shaking up the alt-darknet, like Hillary Clinton's secret illness, which was proven last night by noted medical expert Karl Rove's face.
She has a concussion on the 13th of December, falls down and has a concussion, but we're not told about it until the 15th of December, 2 days later. We're told on the 25th that, or excuse me, I actually got this written down.
The
on
whiteboard,
the 20th, we're told,
on the health.
Whiteboard. We're told on the 28th. We're told on the 28th of December that she's going to be back to the office next week. On the 30th, she's hospitalized with a blood clot, but we're not told about it until the next day.
2 pages.
On the 23rd of January, 2013, she shows up at the Benghazi hearing wearing Fresnel prism glasses that help people who've suffered a concussion or traumatic brain injury get their vision right. In fact, the next year, her husband, Bill Clinton, says it was terrible. The concussion required 6 months of very serious work to get over. That's what he admitted a year later.
Oh my God! Hillary Clinton's illness has already spread to Megyn Kelly, causing her vertical blindness in one eye and uncontrollable giggles, evidently. Now, Hillary Clinton has got to be true. Karl Rove wrote it on whiteboards. And those are used only for the most mysterious and serious matters, like conspiracy theories, fantasy football drafts, and drawing dongs in the break room. There are so many things that the puppet masters of politics don't want us to know. And tonight, I'm gonna shine a light on them in my new segment, The Late Show presents Stephen Colbert's Tinfoil Hat. Now, Hillary Clinton's supporters say Secretary Clinton is not ill. Oh, really? Then why is it right in her name? Okay, enough politics. That's what they want us to talk about. It's a distraction from the real question. How come only one type of dog is allowed to be a fireman? Do all other dogs love setting fires? Is China genetically engineering super smart babies? How else can you explain the fact that by the time they're 3, they can all speak Chinese? I want you to consider the very real possibility that all Jason Bourne movies are the same movie.
As said earlier, gaslighting is the other technique that they use. Gaslighting is psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, perception of reality, or memories. It typically leads to confusion, loss of confidence and self-esteem, uncertainty of one's emotional or mental stability, and a dependency on the perpetrator.
We have to start compelling people, because a lot of them seem to think that because it's not affecting me directly, because maybe I'm young or maybe I'm healthy, or maybe I believe some post that I've seen on Facebook saying Bill Gates wants me to get vaccinated so he can turn me into a robot.
While this may sound a little sci-fi for some of you, there is a visible progression from the Internet of Things into this more body-attached network that I'm calling the Internet of Bodies.
People will literally be part of a network. All the bodies, all the brains.
Could there be a connection between those two?
Nobody wants to know what's in the vaccines because, look, if people understood what was in the vaccine, they'd go apeshit.
And you see, the difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you if you take a genetic editing.
Could there be a connection between those two?
You've written extensively on the topic that you've asked me to speak to, mastering the fourth industrial revolution.
The Internet of Bodies will for the first time mean that software will start causing physical harm to human bodies with some regularity.
Could there be a connection between those two?
COVID makes it accelerates the process of digitalization and automatization. It legitimizes the deployment of mass surveillance, and it makes surveillance go under your skin.
This is Richard Werner, the top academic scholar in the world on central banking.
The nature of this CBDC, what is it actually going to look like? They never talk about that. Right. But I heard one European central banker tell me what it's going to look like, and it was around this large and would be implanted under your skin.
We start with a vision of a world where humans are progressively more irrelevant and we are the problem.
Could there be a connection between those two?
CBDC. If that happens, we're done.
BRICS is also pushing a digital currency and has launched a vaccine research and development center.
Could there be a connection between those two?
So we have to start making their lives complicated as well.
Okay, you sound really angry with people who have decided not to get vaccinated for whatever reason that might be that they've made that decision.
Yeah, I am angry, and I think people are angry because we want to get out of this. We want our lives back. We want to get back to normality. We want to work again. We want to see people again. We want to have a Christmas that we're not talking about vaccination rates or infection rates, but we're actually talking about our Christmas plans and meeting our loved ones. We want our families to be protected. We want our communities to be protected. And that's why there are no scientific arguments to be made for not getting vaccinated. I'm not a virologist, but the anti-vaxxers aren't virologists either. There's no debate, because you can't debate somebody who believes in a religious belief, almost a cult-like thing of, well, I'm just not going to get vaccinated, and I'm not going to listen to my doctor, I'm not going to listen to the overwhelming evidence and opinion of the world's leading scientists. You can't debate with them. At this stage, we're talking about almost hardcore cranks.
Yeah, but you're talking, Joe, then about forcing people to take a vaccine if they have decided, as they have a right to decide. They've a right to decide. Look, I don't want to take this for whatever reason.
Yeah, they have a right. They have a right to decide, and if they want to lock themselves out of society because they will not live up to the responsibilities that they should be facing, then yeah, they have a right to decide that. You can't force people. Nobody's talking about forcing people to take vaccines, marching them down to health centres, but you can compel people, or you can let them know that if that is the decision you take, then unfortunately we cannot have you in our spaces. We cannot have you with the risk that you pose to our society, to our people, to our loved ones. It's not forcing, but it is definitely compelling.
The systematic study of mass psychology revealed to students the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate man in the group. Trotter and Laban, who approached the subject in a scientific manner, and Graham Wallace, Walter Lippmann, and others who continued with searching studies of the group mind established that the group has mental characteristics distinct from those of the individual and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the question naturally arose: if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, is it then not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing about it? Edward Bernays, 1928.
This new act of aggression, aimed directly at our own forces, again brings home to all of us in the United States the importance of the struggle for peace and security in Southeast Asia. Aggression by terror against the peaceful villagers of South Vietnam has now been joined by open aggression on the high seas against the United States of America.
They engaged my services, and I wondered what I could do to change the impression made by the words, "Coolidge was weaned on a pickle."
That was a problem. What did you do?
And so I decided that at that time, actors and actresses did not quite belong to a family home or a family party. And I decided that if President Coolidge had breakfast with Al Jolson and the Dolly sisters, who were ecstasiastic dancers, and Charlotte Greenwood and other actors and actresses, the public would recognize that he was an extraordinary humanist kind of personality, and that obviously he couldn't have been weaned on a pickle. He must have been weaned on pure milk. And so what I did was to tell Colonel Woods to hire a couple of sleeping cars, Pullman cars, take them down to Washington overnight and have breakfast with Coolidge. And as these actors and actresses came in, I'd say, "What is your name?" And they'd say, "Al Jolson." "Mr. Jolson, President Coolidge." And we had no contact with the newspapers. They were the principal media. There was no radio and no television. And next morning, there wasn't a newspaper in this country, and there were about 2,000 dailies then, and 10,000 weeklies, that didn't have a front page story that says President Coolidge breakfasts at the White House with Al Jolson, the Dolly sisters, and other Broadway stars. And the New York Times, in its second headline, had the line which said, "President nearly laughs." And what the effect of it was, obviously, at that time, Gallup was not yet around, but Mr. Coolidge was elected President of the United States, and I have a letter from him hanging on my wall.
Edward Bernays was born in 1891 to Jewish parents in the town of Vienna, Austria. The very next year, his family would move to New York City, where he would be raised. Edward was Sigmund Freud's nephew 2 times over, being that his father, Eli Bernays, and Freud each married each other's sister. After graduating from Cornell University, Bernays decided to begin a career in journalism rather than pursuing one in agriculture as per his degree. Early on in his career, Bernays fought for sex education and created the Medical Review of Review's Sociological Fund Committee, where he gained the support of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Anne Vanderbilt, and John D. Rockefeller. It was during these early years of Bernays' life where he learned much about advertising and the human psyche. An avid studier of his Uncle Freud's works, he began to suss out a systematic breakdown of the inner workings of society and how to implement them on a grand scale. Although you do not know his name, Edward Bernays is arguably to this day the most influential human being in our modern society. For example, does your town fluoridate your water? Well, you could thank Edward Bernays for that. You see, in the mid to late 1940s, Edward Bernays was hired by Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, to orchestrate a public relations campaign with the goal of convincing political leaders and the public to add their aluminum waste byproduct, fluoride salts, to the nation's water supply. He accomplished this by using an old advertising trope that he himself invented roughly 20 years prior, using doctors, scientists, or some form of, quote, professional to endorse a product so the public will blindly follow. In this particular case, it was dentists. Bernays took a study on fluoride in teeth and got dentists across the country to sign off on its ability to prevent cavities. Using the endorsement of dentists countrywide, he was able to sell this concept to different states and municipalities. To this day, fluoride is added to nearly all of the drinking water across the United States. All thanks to Edward Bernays. Now, what his campaign neglected to mention was the fact that you ingest water far more frequently than you brush your teeth with it, and that all the chemicals in said water are absorbed through your skin on a nightly basis. But none of that mattered, because dentists say it's good for your teeth, so fluoride is a go. This was a method invented by Bernays when he was commissioned in the 1920s by the Beechnut Company to sell bacon. You see, before the 1920s, breakfast was barely a thing. People might have eaten a scone or something light, but for the most part, before this time, breakfast was essentially non-existent. So what Bernays did was to send letters to 5,000 doctors asking them if a bigger breakfast was healthier than a smaller one, being that we expend energy every night while we sleep. 4,500 of these 5,000 doctors agreed, and the phrase, 9 out of 10 doctors approve, was born. Bernays then paired the bacon with eggs, presented it as part of a healthy breakfast, doctor approve of course, and thus was the beginning of bacon and eggs for breakfast, still going strong 100 years later. Now think about that. That's 3 major things that are regular parts of society to this day. Fluoride in the water, bacon and eggs for breakfast, or any breakfast for that matter, and 9 out of 10 doctors approved. All Bernays. Bernays wrote this in his 1928 book Propaganda in reference to this tactic, that, quote, he knew as a mathematical certainty large numbers of persons would follow the advice of their doctors because he understood the psychological relation of dependence of men upon their physicians. And what do they do anytime they want to push something to this day? 9 in 10 scientists think climate change is real. It's the same trick they've been using since Bernays invented it. Are we so naive to think that at some point they decided to stop using these tactics for nefarious reasons? And furthermore, over the last 100 years, do you think they've gotten worse at using these tactics or better? After all, it wasn't too long ago that they were making commercials like this.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose. In a repeated national survey, doctors in all branches of medicine, doctors in all parts of the country were asked, "What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?" Once again, the brand named most was Camel. Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Why not change to Camels for the next 30 days and see what a difference it makes in your smoking enjoyment? See how Camels agree with your throat. See how mild and good-tasting a cigarette can be.
More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Well, if the doctors are okay with it, then obviously there's nothing wrong with smoking. Or how about this 1953 ad from Chesterfield's, which boasts that there is now scientific evidence of the effects of smoking. After 10 months, the medical specialist reports that he observed no adverse effects on the nose, throat, and sinuses of the group smoking Chesterfields. What, you don't believe in science? These are just some of the ways the public are manipulated by the machinations of Edward Bernays. He also invented the presidential photo op as a way to improve Calvin Coolidge's dull persona, as you heard in the opening clip. That's right, the very notion of presidents gallivanting with celebrities and using them to help them win an election was created by none other than Edward Bernays. He is also the main reason women smoke. See, back in Bernays' time, nearly zero women smoked, until he staged a photo op on behalf of the American Tobacco Company at the New York City Easter Day Parade, where he paid women to light up right as they passed the main group of photographers. The next day, their, quote, torches of freedom were on every newspaper, and from that day forward, little by little, women began smoking countrywide. You could see these tactics in use today. While back then staging a public spectacle in front of the cameras to have it spread far and wide was a new concept, nowadays it is all too common. For instance, the infamous scene at the MTV Music Awards where Miley Cyrus danced half naked and performed lewd acts on stage. I personally had never heard of the drug Molly before that night, and by no means was I sheltered. I remember asking my friend, who promptly informed me that it was the raw form of ecstasy. Now, how many other people learned about Molly that night? But that wasn't the controversy. The performance was spread far and wide due to its overt sexual nature. Not a peep about the fact that the song was about a hardcore narcotic. And that is yet another tactic laid out in Edward Bernays' 1928 book, Propaganda. In this book, he wrote to use indirect approaches. Don't sell the item head on, attach it to something else and sell that. Don't sell pianos, sell the idea of music rooms with pianos being a staple. Don't sell ivory soap, sell a soap sculpting contest where they all use ivory, so on and so forth. So while what Miley Cyrus was doing on stage was bad enough and a horrible influence on her millions of adolescent fans, nearly no one mentions the hardcore drug use that was attached to it. But these examples are just a section of the propaganda machine that Edward Bernays helped create. For you see, the manipulation of public goes far beyond getting them to consent to ingesting toxins, being sexualized, and having new drugs introduced to them on a mass scale. On page 73 of Propaganda, Edward Bernays writes that if you can, quote, influence the leaders either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway. This is why we are constantly sectioned off into groups: white, Hispanic, Asian, black, right, left, straight, gay, and so on. Bernays continues, man's judgment is a melange of impressions stamped on his mind by outside influences which unconsciously control his thought. Trotter and Laban concluded that the group mind does not think in the strict sense of the word. In place of thoughts, it has impulses, habits, and emotions. In making up its mind, its first impulse is usually to follow the example of a trusted leader. This is one of the most firmly established principles of mass psychology. Group dynamics and manipulation of the herd mentality for purposes of controlling the masses are mapped out at length in this book and clearly have been studied by the manipulators of today. I mean, just look at the riots. Do you think any one of these rioters would be undertaking in this mayhem if it were just him on the street alone? No. He feels comfortable in the group. Their similar actions give him an unspoken consent to do the same. Now, most rational people would want to simply have a conversation with someone with a different belief. Instead, as we've watched over and over, anyone these groups are encountering are being dragged from their cars and beaten. Why? Because the group is doing it. This is not by accident. This is why there are allegedly paid agitators planted in these protests to initiate these acts, in order to guide the group towards violence. These tactics have been studied and documented by people of importance, and their names have been hidden from the classrooms for a reason. On page 44, Bernays states that this invisible, intertwining structure of groupings and associations is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Now, the very beginnings of the propaganda machine go back to just before Bernays, and was born during the circulation wars of the late 1800s between Joseph Pulitzer's New York World and William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal, where both began sensationalizing the news in order to drive up circulation. This is where the term yellow journalism was coined by Irwin Wardman, the editor of the New York Press, to describe it, and it is an integral part of the propaganda machine to this day. In fact, one could argue that sensationalizing stories to elicit an emotional reaction by certain groups in the public stratosphere is one of the most prominent elements of the current media apparatus. Bernays was well aware of this dynamic and even got a chance to study it firsthand, as he himself was actually employed by William Randolph Hearst, where he also tested many of his own propaganda techniques. Bernays writes on page 55 that this new method of propaganda, quote, takes account not merely of the individual, nor even the mass mind alone, but also and especially the anatomy of society with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism. This tool is of extreme importance to the ruling elite who wield the power of influence beheld by our media, because as Bernays writes on page 64, governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist, depend upon acquiescent public opinion for the success of their efforts. And in fact, government is government only by virtue of public acquiescence. Public opinion is the unacknowledged partner in all broad efforts. They need the approval of the people. You cannot simply make abortion legal and fund it. You need first a certain percentage of public support to fight for it. You need to rebrand it. You need to elicit emotional attachments to it. Sometimes you can even do that by touching a nerve on the opposite side, create an uproar, and in turn help spread word around the country, gaining supporters along with the expected dissenters. All you need is a certain amount of approval, and as you have seen, there are tried and true methods to achieve it. Bernays realized that ideas were weapons. With full control over the media, these weapons could be used to sway the public to nearly any opinion without them even knowing it. This is a concept that I personally learned quite accidentally back in 2010. The emotional response being elicited was that of laughter as a vehicle of slander. This moment was a major eye-opener to me at the time, and is indeed relevant in several ways to this documentary. See, back in 1999, I was 19, I just got a new job, which meant a whopping pay jump from $5.45 an hour at Burger King to $7 an hour at my new place of business, working the counter at my local pizza place. Well, it was that moment that I decided I did not want to listen to another Yankee game. So I proceeded to put $10 aside a week. For the first time in my life, I got cable, and subsequently the MSG network. That's where the Yankees were broadcast at the time. Well, another thing happened that year. I discovered Comedy Central and my new favorite show, The Daily Show. For so many years, this would be my go-to program. While it ripped on Republicans, it also ripped on Democrats. It was really funny, in my opinion. But now, around 2004, The Daily Show, if some of you remember, started going hard left, and the balance of who got the brunt of the joke started tipping heavily on the conservative side. But it was somewhat gradual, at least in the beginning, and I had already been a fan for so long, I just continued to watch. I didn't really give it too much thought, although eventually it did start becoming unbearable. As some of you might remember, starting in the late 2000s, Glenn Beck became a regular target of Jon Stewart jokes. Now, while the show's left turn never really swayed me away from my right leanings, I believed for many years that I did not like Glenn Beck. In fact, I hated Glenn Beck. Faces he made, the whole nine. I would even get mad that there were people like this making a mockery of the things I believed in, essentially, in a way, blaming the Glenn Becks of the world for my favorite show increasingly becoming harder and harder to stand due to their constant ripping on Republicans and right-wing ideologies. Then I watched the Glenn Beck show, and I almost never watched cable news. I'd always found the news in general to be depressing and seemingly on purpose for that matter. But I did use to DVR Red Eye, because Jimmy and Anthony from my favorite show, Hopi and Anthony, would be on it from time to time, and I really fell in love with it. Now, Red Eye was a show that aired on Fox News at 3 a.m. So one night, I turn on the TV, and it's still on Fox, assumingly from DVR and Red Eye the night before. And who comes on the screen but Glenn Beck? Now, why I decided to keep this show on that night with a guy who I'd utterly despised for years, to this day, I have no idea. But that episode blew my mind. Because for starters, it was a show unlike any other news shows. All these shows on all these channels every day would tell the news of the day and discuss it, even Red Eye. But that wasn't this. This show was a deep dive, along with references and things that I could look up after the show. I didn't know political cable news shows like this even existed. I mean, sure, you have 60 Minutes and things like that, the little mini exposés, but this was something different. Here was someone in Glenn Beck who I blindly hated for years without even watching one single show of his. That alone made me question so many of my opinions on so many things. It really bothered me for a while. But that aside, I began watching him, and only a handful of episodes later, he did a show called The Puppet Master. This was a show about a man I had never heard of before named George Soros. In this show, Glenn Beck talked about the machinations of Soros behind the scenes, the part of the play you don't see. And in doing this, during that episode, he did a quick mocking of the fake show that's presented to us while the real show goes on behind the scenes. All pretty straightforward stuff. Well, that night, as I still did from time to time, I had The Daily Show on and proceeded to watch Jon Stewart present this quick mocking of the fake show as Glenn Beck's breakdown of George Soros to roaring laughter, which was a complete misrepresentation of the whole point. And I can't even begin to describe the gut punch it gave me. I literally just watched that episode, and that was not what that scene was. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks, just how easy it was to change someone's perception of something. That was the last episode I ever watched of The Daily Show. And when I say that at one time this was my favorite show, I mean absolute favorite show. Stephen vs. Stephen with Colbert and Carell, Louis Black, Rob Corddry, I even used to like Samantha Bee, all from The Daily Show. That was my last episode, and I began watching Glenn Beck a little more closely. And about a month or so later, he did an episode on another guy I had never heard of before, Edward Bernays. I could tell you, after that episode, I never looked at TV the same again. I was on Yahoo looking up articles for a friggin' month after that. If you would have told me that the breakfast as we knew it didn't exist in the 1700s or even the 1800s, you could have knocked me over with a feather. But it was so much more than that. I mean, here was a man who shaped our entire society, and I had never heard his name a day in my life. Like, how is that possible? It was possible because why would the very machine created 90 years prior with the express intent of controlling the masses tell you about its architect? To do that would be to admit its very existence and turn risk its very unraveling. You see, Edward Bernays wasn't just the man who invented breakfast, or the reason women smoked, or why people had pianos in their music rooms and bars of ivory soap in their bathrooms. He wasn't just the man who was responsible for the fluoride in our tap water, or the reason we were sectioned off into groups as a way to be more easily manipulated. He was also one of the men hired by Woodrow Wilson to the Committee on Public Information, or, as it was alternately known, the Creel Committee, which was created with the sole purpose of influencing public opinion to support U.S. participation in World War I. The Committee on Public Information was this country's first official modern propaganda office. Headed by George Creel, they set out to systematically reach every person in the United States multiple times with patriotic information about how each individual can contribute to the war effort. Bernays recalls his time there in this interview.
I was a member of the United States Committee on Public Information in World War I, and I worked with the committee to make this, the war to end all wars, which was Wilson's idea, and the war to make the world safe for democracy, and to popularize throughout the world the 14 points. And I found that ideas were weapons and were even more effective than bullets, because when Woodrow Wilson said freedom of the seas, the Swiss, who had been neutral in the war, recognized that they depended on freedom of the seas and came over to our side. And when one of the 14 points said independence for ethnic entities, various ethnic groups on the Baltic Sea who were owned or part of Russia decided that they wanted to be independent. The Lithuanians, the Lats, and the Estonians. And when I got back from the war, I recognized that ideas could be as important weapons as anything. And first, I called what we did publicity direction. I would direct the conduct of people so that they could win through ideas their public goals. And soon I found out that I could give advice and a person could win his or her goals, whether it was to become an elected official or whether to become the head of a corporation or whether to sell ideas or a product. And I found out that one action that they might commit would destroy whatever reputation had been built up through public visibility. If a politician called somebody a Polak or a chink, as I remember somebody did some years ago, they would lose their place in a democratic society. So I decided that if people wanted to meet their goals, which always depended on the public, even in the case of a hermit who had to be fed by somebody, that it was basically important to have actions considered as carefully as words. And we changed the name of what we did from publicity direction to counsel, which I took from lawyers, advice on public relations, which really means on their relationships with the public.
The Council on Public Relations. Bernays writes this of the Council on page 64 of Propaganda. The Public Relations Council is the agent who, working with the modern media of communications and the group formations of society, brings an idea to the consciousness of the public. The Council on Public Relations is the control center of the public hive mind. Now, going back to the place that spawned this creation in the mind's eye of Bernays, Woodrow Wilson's Committee on Public Information, this is the blueprint in creating public consent for the war effort. Step one was dehumanizing the enemy. Propaganda against the Huns was plastered in newspapers and posters from coast to coast across the United States. The Germans were made to look like monsters, in some cases literal subhuman apes. The public were bombarded with these images until they despised the Huns, which led to step two, getting people to join the fight. It was as a member of this very operation where James Montgomery Flagg created his iconic picture of Uncle Sam with this poster. Now, many would later point out striking likeness to Eliphas Levi's infamous 1856 depiction of the Baphomet, with the wings of the hat lining up perfectly with its ears, similar facial features, the same expression, goatees, both having one arm up and one arm down, and a star of the exact same proportions and orientation placed above the eyes. While there's no proof that this was done by Flagg on purpose, there is, curiously enough, this picture in the Library of Congress entitled Satan, James Montgomery Flagg. The Committee on Public Information was the beginning of the establishment's propaganda machine. It did its job, and enough Americans eventually grew to support the war. On April 6, 1917, the U.S. finally enters World War I. Now, what's especially interesting about this is that to the public, Woodrow Wilson constantly said that he did not want to get into World War I and that we should remain neutral, and even used this as a campaign slogan for his 1916 re-election. Yet behind the scenes, once he's back in office, he creates this council to whip up support for the war, which works like a charm, and the United States of America then in fact do enter World War I. This was the blueprint for creating public consent for many wars to come. The dynamic set by the World War I Propaganda Council has been repeated over and over through the years. For example, in the opening sequence, we observed the clip of President Johnson describing the Gulf of Tonkin incident as a final straw to escalate United States participation in Vietnam. America was attacked by monsters. We were left with no choice. The Gulf of Tonkin incident he is referring to was made up as a way to create public support for the war effort, exactly in line with the World War I Propaganda Council slander campaign of the Germans. Before the Gulf War, a young lady had testified that Iraqi troops had forged a terror campaign in Kuwait, which included taking babies out of their incubators and leaving them on the floor to die. This story was repeated by President Bush and created a swell in public support for the war effort. This was also found to be fake and rehearsed, the same blueprint over and over. Now, when all was said and done with World War I, Bernays accompanied Woodrow Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, which, at Wilson's behest, spawned the League of Nations, which was the predecessor of the current United Nations. It was also here where the Treaty of Versailles was penned, the document which would collapse Germany's economy under the impossible-to-pay war debts, perfectly fermenting the environment that led to the rise of Hitler and subsequently World War II. Also in attendance at the Paris Peace Conference was Arthur Balfour, who not long before that, on November 2nd, 1917, had authorized the Balfour Declaration, which stated that the Rothschilds now had the backing of the English crown to establish their own state inside of Palestine. Ironically, this would not come to fruition until the end of the war, which was a byfactor of the treaty signed at that very conference. Also at that conference with Bernays and President Wilson was Wilson's top advisor, Edward Mandell House, who was yet another very important figure. The Woodrow Wilson administration is a crucial moment in American history. You see, it was under Wilson that not only the propaganda machine of Bernays' machinations was born, but which all the major cornerstones of the cabal's takeover of the United States were set in place. 1. 1913, Wilson signs the Federal Reserve Act, creating a private central bank. 2. That very same year, Wilson signs the 16th Amendment, establishing Congress' right to impose a federal income tax. 3. Woodrow Wilson gets world leaders to make his idea of a League of Nations a reality, and even wins the Nobel Peace Prize for being its architect. 4. Wilson's top advisor, Edward Mandell House, creates the Council on Foreign Relations, and 5. Wilson's wartime propagandist, Edward Bernays, creates the Council on Public Relations. In one short period of time, the entire foundation is set in place. Control of the banking systems, access to the public's income, their main recruitment group, and their main propaganda machine. This last one being the best kept secret of all. The nephew of Sigmund Freud studied in the arts of controlling the masses by using group dynamics and herd mentalities on Wilson's Committee of War Propaganda, along with Walter Lippmann and headed by George Creel. The result of these real-life mass studies of the public hive mind, culminating in the penning of Bernays' blueprint for guiding the masses, propaganda. The opening paragraph reads as follows. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. These are words to be heeded when considering the power currently wielded by the media machine. This was not a nobody. This was not some unknown work of literature. In fact, this was the very book Joseph Goebbels used of his own admission to map out his entire Nazi propaganda campaign. Are we so naive to think that the Nazis' media machine structured themselves after this man's blueprints on how to control society, but not the United States? This man was not a Nazi, he did not live in Germany. He was a United States citizen. He was employed by President Wilson on his World War I propaganda council. He was also employed by President Coolidge. He was also employed by President Hoover. He had been supported by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Ann Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller. He invented the very practice of using doctors and scientists to sell ideas to a gullible public. 9 out of 10 approved. He was even commissioned by the U.S. government to help facilitate the 1954 coup against the president of Guatemala in accordance with the CIA. Here's even a letter thanking Bernays on behalf of CIA Director Allen Dulles from 1959. He's the reason there's fluoride in the water. He's the reason we eat breakfast and so much more. But most importantly of all, he is the man who used his uncle Sigmund Freud's studies to break down society into controllable subunits. The man who mapped out how to section people off into groups, how to infiltrate said groups, and then how to use these infiltrated groups to sway the public's will without them even knowing it. He is the architect of the media, Hollywood, government conglomerate that works in consort with each other behind the scenes to mold the hive mind of the American public. The father of the fake news. On page 68, Bernays writes that inadequate information or false information from unknown sources may have results of enormous importance. This, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated statements of the entire book. And while we already saw this play out earlier with The Daily Show's purposeful misrepresentation of the Glenn Beck program, in our current climate, we can observe this tactic being deployed nearly daily, with a society completely sectioned off into groups, as Bernays so explicitly laid out as the most important factor when aiming to control the masses. All you need to do is push a certain button, elicit an emotional reaction from one side or the other, and watch the groups jump at each other's throat. Race versus race, religion versus religion, gender versus gender, class versus class. This is why Bernays' blueprint to this day looms so crucially over every machination of the media machine. It is the foundation of this weapon that they wield against us, the structure that everything is based on, the Council on Public Relations. And through the Council on Foreign Relations, they have been able to recruit and plant bad actors in nearly every group in America. Exactly as Bernays suggested. Because propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. And now we know how the entire system has been set up. And if you know how it's been built, it can be deconstructed, one piece at a time.
Tell me, where am I supposed to go? And who am I supposed to believe? If only you knew what I knew, then you could see just what I see.